Once upon a time, on a chilly morning, a tiny cat was avoiding getting ready for the day. It was another early morning, and sunlight was starting to pour through the gaps of the blinds, casting rays of light onto the brown carpet. Her room was small and cozy, with diagrams of plants and flowers covering the walls. Her twin bed was in the middle of the room, and she was still in it. She squinted her sleeping eyes at the sunlight and turned over. She knew what time it was. Most people in town were still sound asleep, but this was a special day for this tiny cat. She had things to do, plants to see, and places to go. And so, she was sort of awake. The kind of awake that just needs a few more minutes. She would have been out of bed if not for the cold air that had seeped through the bottom of the doors and edges of the windows at night. You see, it was fall, and the air was crisp, so she snuggled under the warm, fleecy covers. If you asked a polar bear, they might laugh at this mild coldness, but for this particular cat, this was quite unpleasant, fur or not. Using her instincts, she gathered the blanket in a way that only her nose was visible from the outside and nothing else. She was waiting for smells. Such a small cat could not just get out of bed without a reward. Then, the smell of bacon and sweet maple traveled into her room from downstairs. She could also faintly hear the sounds of a spatula against a plate, metal pans being moved into the oven, and the sound of someone humming a cheerful song in a deep voice. Her father was busy in the kitchen, as he usually was. He was a morning person who was often up hours before anyone else. If you asked him, the best way to wake someone up was to give them something to look forward to, which in his mind was always related to food. So he made breakfast each and every morning for his small daughter, who hated getting out of bed. And since this day was so special for her, he took extra care. One of his favorite things was seeing his daughter happily eat, and so what seemed to be an elaborate spread was just another morning for him. He was currently making maple cinnamon muffins in the oven, crispy bacon on the skillet, cheesy potatoes and peppered eggs in another pan, and an array of fall fruits cut into hearts and stars on a blue platter. In her room, the tiny cat didn't know exactly what he was making, but she really didn't need to. Her stomach was gurgling in anticipation at all the smells coming through her doorway. Compelled, she launched her body out of bed, not forgetting to take her fleece blanket along with her. Her eyes were still closed as she walked down the stairs, miraculously not tripping. Entering the kitchen wordlessly, she then clumsily climbed up onto the dining table. It wasn't a common place to sit, but there was always a cup of hot tea placed there for her, and she couldn't be bothered to sit in a chair. If you asked her, it was way too early for that kind of propriety. The sight of her stumbling into the kitchen made her father laugh, and he kissed her forehead. "Good morning, my love. Did you sleep well?" She mumbled that it was okay and sipped her tea. This morning, the tea was Earl Grey. Her father had chosen the tea from a mystery tea box that had a random assortment of teas. This mystery tea box would get replenished each week after a visit from Grandma and the neighbors. They gave her all sorts of teas because they knew she was an avid fan of warm beverages. The warm drink felt soothing to her throat after a night of breathing in cold and dry air. Her father patted her head and finished up, placing the dishes full of food on the table space around her. After drinking her tea, she was finally awake enough to sit in a chair, and so they sat together at the table in semi-silence, eating their delicious breakfast, occasionally talking about their goals for the day. They didn't need to talk much, as they were both occupied in their own morning habits. Her father was reading the paper with a pen in his hand, circling ideas he wanted to learn more about, often cracking a knuckle after turning a page. the tiny cat was also reading, but instead of paper, she was engrossed in her favorite magazine. It had a special article about a new species of mushroom in the local area. This magazine came every month, full of magical plants and fungi with amazing photo diagrams to boot. This special new mushroom in the article was the local kazoo mushroom that looked like a white kazoo and let out a musical toot when the top was pressed. This was the very reason she woke up early. She was going to go find this mushroom and hear that sweet toot. After eating, she got dressed and packed her bag of supplies. As she pulled on her shoes, her father came to the door with a lunchbox of muffins and breakfast leftovers. "If it gets too cold, come back home, okay? We have mushrooms here in the garden, too." She frowned and gave him a goodbye hug grumpily. "Dad, you know they aren't the same." He looked amused but didn't say another word about it. As she walked into the forest, he waved. "Have a wonderful day, my love."